The rain fell heavily on the cracked sidewalk outside St. Mary's Hospital. Sarah clutched her worn jacket tighter around her thin frame as she watched the expensive cars pull up to the main entrance. At 17, she had learned to make herself invisible, but today she needed to be seen. Today, her mother's life depended on it. Maria Santos lay unconscious in the emergency room, her swollen belly a constant reminder of the baby she carried at 7 months. The doctors had been clear. Without immediate surgery, both mother and child would die within hours, but the hospital required payment up front, something Sarah simply didn't have. She had spent the last 3 hours approaching anyone who looked wealthy enough to help. Most people hurried past without even glancing at the desperate teenager. Some threw loose change, thinking she was just another street beggar. None understood that she wasn't asking for herself. Dr. Alexander Hayes stepped out of his black BMW, adjusting his expensive watch as he prepared for another long day at the hospital. At 42, he was one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the city. His hands had saved countless lives, and his bank account reflected his success. But success had come at a cost. He had become cold, focused only on his work and the wealthy patients who could afford his expertise. Sarah saw him immediately. Everything about Dr. Hayes screamed money: his tailored suit, his confident walk, the way other hospital staff nodded respectfully as he passed. This was her chance. She ran toward him, her bare feet splashing through puddles. "Please, sir, please help me," Sarah called out, reaching for his arm. Dr. Hayes instinctively pulled away, annoyed by the interruption. He had learned to ignore the homeless people who often gathered around hospitals, hoping for handouts or free medical care. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," he said curtly, not even looking at her face. "My mother is dying." Sarah's voice cracked with desperation. "She's pregnant and the doctors say she needs surgery right now, but we don't have money. Please, I'll do anything. I'll work for you, clean your house, anything." Something in her voice made Dr. Hayes pause. He turned to look at the girl properly for the first time. She was clearly malnourished, her clothes dirty and torn, but her eyes held a fierce determination he rarely saw, even in his wealthy patients' families. "Where is your mother?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Emergency room, bed 12, Sarah said quickly. "Her name is Maria Santos. The baby is coming too early because she collapsed. The doctors say they need $20,000 before they'll operate." Dr. Hayes knew the hospital's policy well. Emergency cases were supposed to be treated regardless of payment ability, but complicated surgeries often fell into a gray area. Without insurance, the hospital demanded guarantees before proceeding with expensive procedures. Against his better judgment, Dr. Hayes found himself walking toward the emergency room with Sarah hurrying beside him. He told himself he was just curious, that he would take a quick look and then continue with his day. But something about the girl's desperation reminded him of feelings he had buried long ago. The emergency room was chaos as always. Dr. Hayes used his credentials to access Maria's charts while Sarah waited anxiously nearby. What he read made his medical training kick in immediately. Maria Santos was in critical condition with preeclampsia, a dangerous pregnancy complication that could kill both mother and baby. She needed an emergency cesarean section followed by intensive care. "Dr. Hayes," called out Dr. Jennifer Martinez, one of the emergency room physicians. "I didn't expect to see you down here." "Tell me about the patient in bed 12, Dr. Hayes said, nodding toward Maria. Dr. Martinez lowered her voice. 28-year-old woman, 7 months pregnant, severe preeclampsia with seizures. We've stabilized her temporarily, but she needs surgery immediately. The problem is, no insurance, Dr. Hayes finished. The family can't even cover the basics, let alone the surgical costs and NICU care the baby will need. Administration is pushing us to transfer her to the county hospital, but she's too unstable to move." Dr. Hayes looked through the glass at Maria Santos. Even unconscious, her face showed the strain of her condition. Her belly rose and fell with each labored breath, and monitors showed her vital signs were barely stable. Beside her bed, Sarah held her mother's hand, whispering prayers in Spanish. Something twisted in Dr. Hayes's chest as he watched the scene. The girl's love for her mother was obvious, and her desperation was genuine. He had spent so many years treating wealthy patients who complained about minor discomforts that he had almost forgotten what real suffering looked like. "What's the girl's story?" he asked Dr. Martinez. "Sarah? She's been living on the streets with her mother for about 6 months. They lost their apartment when Maria couldn't work anymore due to pregnancy complications. The girl has been trying to take care of both of them, but it's been impossible." Dr. Hayes processed this information. A 17-year-old girl, homeless and hungry, still fighting desperately to save her mother's life. It was a far cry from his usual patients, who arrived in limousines and demanded the best care money could buy. He walked over to Sarah, who looked up at him with hope and fear in her eyes. "Sarah," he said gently, "tell me about your mother's pregnancy. Has she been receiving any medical care?" "A little," Sarah said quietly. "We went to the free clinic when we could, but they said she needed a specialist. We couldn't afford it. I tried to take care of her, made sure she ate when we had food, found safe places to sleep, but yesterday she started having terrible headaches and then she fell down and wouldn't wake up." The girl's dedication to her mother moved Dr. Hayes in a way he hadn't expected. Here was someone who understood real sacrifice, who put another person's life before her own comfort. It was a stark contrast to his own life of luxury and self-interest. As he stood there, Dr. Hayes realized he was at a crossroads. He could walk away, return to his comfortable routine, and let the system handle Maria Santos as it always handled the poor and uninsured. Or he could step forward and use his skills and resources to save 2 lives. The decision would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. What Dr. Hayes was about to discover would shake his understanding of family, loyalty, and the mysterious ways that lives interconnect across time and circumstance. Dr. Hayes looked at the monitors surrounding Maria's bed, his medical mind automatically calculating the risks. Every minute that passed decreased her chances of survival. The baby's heartbeat was irregular, showing signs of distress from the lack of proper blood flow. This was exactly the kind of case that made other doctors nervous. High risk, expensive, and with no guarantee of success. "I'll operate," he said suddenly, surprising both Dr. Martinez and Sarah. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief. Thank you so much. I promise I'll find a way to pay you back. I'll work for the rest of my life if I have to." Dr. Hayes held up his hand. "We'll worry about payment later. Right now we need to focus on saving your mother and the baby." Within minutes, the emergency room transformed into organized chaos. Nurses prepared Maria for surgery while Dr. Hayes arranged for the operating room and assembled his team. Sarah watched in amazement as this powerful man she had begged on the street now commanded the entire hospital with quiet authority. "Sarah," Dr. Hayes said as they wheeled Maria toward surgery, "the next few hours will be difficult. Do you have anyone who can stay with you?" Sarah shook her head. "It's just been me and Mama for a long time." Something about the way she said it made Dr. Hayes curious, but there was no time for questions. He had a life-threatening surgery to perform. As Maria disappeared through the operating room doors, Sarah settled into an uncomfortable waiting room chair, prepared for the longest wait of her young life. The surgery was more complicated than Dr. Hayes had initially anticipated. Maria's condition had deteriorated significantly, and her body was fighting against the pregnancy that was slowly killing her. He worked with precise skill, making careful incisions while monitoring both patients, for in his mind, the unborn baby was already his patient too. When he finally delivered the baby girl, she was tiny but breathing. The NICU team immediately took over her care while Dr. Hayes focused on saving Maria's life. The preeclampsia had damaged her organs more than the earlier tests had shown. What should have been a 2-hour surgery stretched into 4 hours of delicate work. Finally, Dr. Hayes emerged from the operating room exhausted but cautiously optimistic. Sarah jumped up from her chair, searching his face for answers. "Your mother is alive," he said, and watched as Sarah's legs nearly gave out with relief. "The surgery went well, but she's very sick. The next 24 hours will be critical. The baby is in intensive care but seems to be breathing on her own." "Can I see them?" Sarah asked. "Your mother is still unconscious, but you can visit briefly." The baby will need to stay in the NICU for several weeks. As they walked toward the intensive care unit, Dr. Hayes found himself studying Sarah more closely. Despite her obvious poverty and the stress of the situation, there was something familiar about her features. She had her mother's dark hair and olive skin, but her bone structure reminded him of someone else. In the ICU, Sarah approached her mother's bed with reverent care. Maria was connected to numerous machines, but her breathing seemed steady. Sarah took her hand and began speaking softly in Spanish, telling her about the baby and promising that everything would be okay. Dr. Hayes watched from the doorway, moved by the girl's maturity and love. At 17, she spoke to her mother, with the wisdom of someone much older, someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Doctor," Sarah said, turning toward him, "what happens now? I mean, with the bills and everything?" It was a fair question. The surgery alone would cost over $30,000, and both Maria and the baby would need weeks of intensive care. The total bill would likely exceed $100,000, money that Sarah obviously didn't have. "Let me worry about that for now," Dr. Hayes said. "The important thing is that your mother recovers." But even as he said it, Dr. Hayes knew the hospital administration would soon be asking difficult questions. His colleagues were already whispering about why he had taken on a charity case, especially one so expensive and time-consuming. Later that evening, Dr. Hayes found himself unable to concentrate on his other patients. He kept thinking about Sarah sitting alone in the waiting room between visits to her mother and sister. The girl hadn't eaten all day, but when he offered to buy her food, she had politely declined, saying she wasn't hungry. Pride, he realized, even in the face of starvation. Finally, he approached her with a different strategy. "Sarah, I need to know more about your mother's medical history to provide the best care. Would you mind answering some questions?" Sarah nodded eagerly. "Anything. To help her mother. Tell me about your family," Dr. Hayes said, settling into the chair beside her. "Are there any relatives we should contact?" Sarah's expression darkened. "There's no one. My grandmother died 2 years ago. She was the one who raised us after—" Sarah paused, seeming to wrestle with difficult memories. "After what?" Dr. Hayes prompted gently. "After my father left," Sarah said quietly. "I was just a baby, so I don't remember him. Mama never talked about him much. She said he was an important man who couldn't be bothered with a family." Dr. Hayes felt a strange chill run down his spine. "Do you know your father's name?" Sarah hesitated. "Mama made me promise never to try to find him. She said he made his choice long ago, and we needed to make our own way in the world." "But you know his name?" Sarah looked up at Dr. Hayes with eyes that seemed much older than her 17 years. "Alexander Hayes," she said simply. "My father's name is Alexander Hayes." The world seemed to stop spinning for Dr. Hayes. The waiting room sounds faded away, and all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. He stared at Sarah's face, seeing now what he had missed before: the shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw, features he recognized from his own mirror. 17 years ago, he had been a young medical student, arrogant and focused only on his future success. He had met Maria Santos at a community health fair where he was volunteering for extra credit. She was beautiful, kind, and working 2 jobs to support her sick mother. They had a brief but intense relationship that ended when Dr. Hayes received an opportunity to study abroad. He remembered the night he told Maria he was leaving. She had seemed upset, but he was too excited about his career prospects to pay attention to her emotions. When she tried to call him before his departure, he had ignored her messages, assuming she was just trying to convince him to stay. By the time he returned a year later, she had moved away, and he had been too busy building his career to track her down. Now, 17 years later, his daughter was sitting beside him, and he hadn't even recognized her. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "look at me." She turned toward him, and Dr. Hayes saw his own eyes staring back at him. How had he been so blind? The girl he had helped on the street, whose mother he had just saved, was his own flesh and blood. The realization hit him like a physical blow. All these years, while he had been building his fortune and reputation, his daughter had been struggling on the streets, taking care of her sick mother and unborn sister. The family he had abandoned without a second thought had been fighting for survival just miles away from his luxury penthouse. Sarah noticed his strange expression. "Are you okay, doctor? You look like you've seen a ghost." Dr. Hayes struggled to find words. How do you tell a 17-year-old girl that the father who abandoned her is sitting right beside her? How do you explain 17 years of absence and indifference? But before he could speak, a nurse appeared in the waiting room. "Dr. Hayes, there's been a complication with Maria Santos. We need you in the ICU immediately." Dr. Hayes rushed to the ICU with Sarah close behind, his mind reeling from the revelation about his daughter while trying to focus on the medical emergency. Maria's monitors were beeping frantically, and her blood pressure had dropped dangerously low. The surgical site was showing signs of internal bleeding, a complication that could prove fatal if not addressed immediately. "We need to get her back to surgery now," Dr. Hayes told the ICU team, his professional training taking over despite the emotional turmoil in his head. As they prepared Maria for emergency surgery, he turned to Sarah. "I have to operate again," he said, seeing the fear in her eyes. "This is serious, but I'm going to do everything I can to save her." Sarah nodded, trying to be brave, but Dr. Hayes could see she was terrified. This girl, his daughter, had already been through so much, and now she faced the possibility of losing her mother entirely. The second surgery was even more challenging than the first. Dr. Hayes worked with intense focus, repairing the damaged blood vessels while fighting to keep Maria stable. Every few minutes he found himself thinking about Sarah waiting outside, and the incredible twist of fate that had brought his abandoned family back into his life. 3 hours later, Dr. Hayes emerged from surgery once again, this time more exhausted than he had ever been. The operation had been successful, but Maria remained in critical condition. Sarah was exactly where he had left her, sitting in the same chair, still wearing the same torn clothes she had worn when she begged him for help on the street. "The bleeding has stopped," he told her, sitting down heavily in the chair beside her. "Your mother is stable for now, but she's very weak. The next few days will tell us more about her recovery." Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. When she opened them, she looked at Dr. Hayes with such gratitude that he felt ashamed of his years of selfishness. "Doctor, can I ask you something?" Sarah said quietly. Dr. Hayes tensed, wondering if she had somehow figured out their connection. "Of course. Why are you helping us? I mean, really helping us? Most rich people just walk away when they see people like us." The innocent question cut deeper than Sarah could have known. Dr. Hayes looked at this remarkable young woman, his daughter, who had somehow grown up to be everything he wasn't. Despite her poverty and hardships, she was generous, loving, and selfless. She had spent months caring for her pregnant mother on the streets, never complaining, never giving up hope. "Sometimes," Dr. Hayes said carefully, "we help people because we recognize something of ourselves in them." It wasn't a lie, though Sarah couldn't understand the full meaning of his words. Over the next 2 days, Dr. Hayes found excuses to check on Maria's progress frequently. Each visit gave him a chance to observe Sarah, to learn about the daughter he had never known. She never left the hospital, surviving on whatever food the kind nurses could spare. She had befriended several of the cleaning staff, who spoke Spanish like her mother, and they had become her informal support network. Dr. Hayes discovered that Sarah could read and write in both English and Spanish, despite having dropped out of school when she and her mother became homeless. She was intelligent and curious, asking thoughtful questions about her mother's condition and treatment. When she wasn't worrying about Maria, she spent hours in the NICU, talking to her baby sister through the glass walls of the incubator. "I've decided to name her Elena," Sarah told Dr. Hayes during one of his visits. "It means bright light in Spanish. Even though everything has been so dark lately, she feels like hope." Dr. Hayes was moved by his daughter's strength and optimism. This 17-year-old girl, who had every reason to be bitter and angry at the world, instead focused on love and hope. She was everything he had forgotten how to be. On the third day, Maria finally woke up. Sarah was holding her hand when her mother's eyes fluttered open, and the reunion between mother and daughter brought tears to Dr. Hayes's eyes as he watched from the doorway. "Mija," Maria whispered weakly. "The baby? She's beautiful, Mama. Small, but strong like you. The doctors say she's going to be okay." Maria's eyes found Dr. Hayes standing in the doorway. "Doctor, thank you," she said in accented English. "You saved our lives." Dr. Hayes approached the bed, his heart pounding. Now that Maria was awake, would she recognize him? It had been 17 years, and he looked very different now. Older, more successful, wearing expensive clothes instead of the casual student attire she would remember. But as Maria looked at him more closely, he saw recognition dawn in her eyes. Her face went pale and her hand tightened on Sarah's. "It's you," she whispered, so quietly that only Dr. Hayes could hear. Sarah looked between her mother and the doctor, sensing tension she didn't understand. "Mama, what's wrong? Do you know Dr. Hayes?" Maria's eyes never left Dr. Hayes's face. Years of hurt and betrayal were reflected in her gaze, but also something else, a mother's fierce protectiveness of her children. "No, Mija," Maria said finally, her voice steady despite her weakness. "I thought he reminded me of someone, but I was mistaken." Dr. Hayes understood. Maria was protecting Sarah from the truth, just as she had protected her for 17 years. She was giving him a choice. He could walk away again as he had before, or he could choose to be the father he had never been. "Mrs. Santos," Dr. Hayes said formally, "I'd like to discuss your ongoing care and that of your daughter Elena. Perhaps Sarah could get some food from the cafeteria while we talk?" Sarah looked reluctant to leave her mother, but Maria nodded. "Go, Mija. I'm okay now." After Sarah left, Maria and Dr. Hayes stared at each other across 17 years of separation and silence. "She doesn't know," Maria said. "It wasn't a question. I just found out myself," Dr. Hayes admitted. "When she told me her father's name, I couldn't believe it. And now? What do you want, Alexander?" The way Maria said his name, with years of pain behind it, made Dr. Hayes flinch. "I want to understand. Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" Maria's laugh was bitter. "I tried. I called you before you left for your studies abroad. You wouldn't talk to me. Your roommate said you were too busy with your bright future to deal with complications from your past." Dr. Hayes remembered that phone call now, though at the time he had dismissed it as unimportant. He had been so focused on his career, so certain that nothing should interfere with his plans. "I was young and selfish," he said quietly. "I thought only about myself." "Yes, you did," Maria agreed. "So I raised Sarah alone. When my mother got sick, I worked 3 jobs to pay for her care and support Sarah. When my mother died, I promised I would give Sarah a better life. But then I got pregnant again and I got sick and everything fell apart." "The baby's father?" Dr. Hayes asked. Maria's expression hardened. "A man who promised to love me and then disappeared when things got difficult seems to be a pattern in my life." The accusation stung because it was true. Dr. Hayes had abandoned Maria when she needed him most, and now he was seeing the consequences of that abandonment. His daughter had grown up without a father, had become homeless, had been forced to beg strangers for her mother's life. "Maria," he said, "I want to help. I want to make things right." "For who?" Maria asked sharply. "For Sarah, who has spent her whole life wondering why her father didn't want her? Or for yourself because you feel guilty now that you know the truth?" Before Dr. Hayes could answer, Sarah returned with a sandwich she had purchased with coins she had probably collected from generous strangers. She offered half to her mother, keeping the smaller portion for herself. As Dr. Hayes watched this simple act of love and sacrifice, he realized that his daughter had become a better person than he was, despite every disadvantage life had thrown at her. The question now was whether he could become worthy of being her father. Dr. Hayes spent the next week in an internal struggle he had never experienced before. His days were divided between his regular patients and frequent visits to check on Maria and baby Elena. Each time he saw Sarah, the guilt grew stronger. She treated him with such respect and gratitude, calling him doctor with reverence, completely unaware that he was the father who had abandoned her before she was even born. Maria was recovering well physically, but Dr. Hayes could see the emotional strain in her eyes whenever he entered the room. She watched him carefully, probably wondering what his intentions were and whether he would disappear again once the medical crisis was over. The hospital administration had begun asking questions about the Santos family's bills. The total costs were approaching $150,000, with more expenses accumulating daily. Dr. Hayes had been discreetly covering the charges from his personal accounts, but such a large amount of charity care couldn't go unnoticed forever. "Dr. Hayes," called out Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital's chief administrator, catching him in the hallway. "I need to speak with you about the Santos case." Dr. Hayes had been dreading this conversation. Dr. Williams was known for her strict financial policies, and charity cases were generally discouraged unless they served some public relations purpose. "The family has no insurance and no ability to pay," Dr. Williams continued. "While I admire your compassion, we can't continue providing expensive care without some guarantee of payment. The board is asking questions. I'll handle the financial arrangements," Dr. Hayes said firmly. Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow. "Alexander, that's a very generous gesture, but we're talking about substantial money here. Are you personally guaranteeing their expenses?" "Yes." "May I ask why? This level of personal involvement is unusual for you." Dr. Hayes couldn't very well explain that he had just discovered his 17-year-old daughter sleeping in hospital waiting rooms because she had nowhere else to go. "Sometimes a case affects you differently," he said simply. That evening, Dr. Hayes made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of returning to his luxury penthouse apartment, he checked into a modest hotel room near the hospital. If Sarah was going to sleep in uncomfortable waiting room chairs, he wasn't going to sleep in Egyptian cotton sheets. He found Sarah in the NICU, talking softly to baby Elena through the glass. The baby was growing stronger each day, her tiny fingers grasping at the air as Sarah spoke to her in Spanish and English. "She knows your voice," Dr. Hayes observed, joining Sarah by the incubator. "I think so too," Sarah smiled. "I've been telling her about Mama, about how brave and strong she is. I want Elena to know she comes from fighters." "Tell me about your childhood," Dr. Hayes said impulsively. "What was it like growing up with your mother?" Sarah glanced at him curiously but seemed happy to share. "Mama worked so hard to give me everything she could. She cleaned office buildings at night so she could be home when I got out of school. She helped me with homework even though she was exhausted. When I was little, I used to ask about my father, and she would say that some people aren't meant to be parents, but that didn't mean I wasn't wanted." Each word felt like a knife in Dr. Hayes's chest. Maria had worked night shifts cleaning offices while he had been attending medical school with family money, never worrying about bills or expenses. "She sounds like an amazing mother," he said, quietly. "She is. Even when we became homeless, she never complained. She kept telling me that hard times were temporary, but family was forever. She said that as long as we had each other, we could survive anything." Dr. Hayes turned away, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. Here was a woman who had sacrificed everything for her daughter, while he had sacrificed his daughter for his career without a second thought. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what would you do if your father showed up now, after all these years?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I used to think about that a lot when I was younger. I imagined he would come back and explain why he left, maybe take care of Mama and me. And now? Now I think it's too late," Sarah said honestly. "Mama and I made it through everything without him. We don't need someone who shows up only when it's convenient for him." The words stung, but Dr. Hayes knew he deserved them. Sarah was right. He had forfeited his right to be her father through his own choices. But watching Sarah with baby Elena over the following days, Dr. Hayes saw something that gave him hope. Despite her words about her father, Sarah was naturally forgiving and loving. She had befriended several other families in the hospital, sharing what little food she had, and offering comfort to other children who were scared or lonely. When Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman whose grandson was in the ICU, broke down crying because she couldn't afford to stay in a hotel, Sarah immediately invited her to sleep in the family waiting room. When 10-year-old Marcus was terrified before his surgery, Sarah sat with him for hours, telling him stories and holding his hand until his parents arrived. Dr. Hayes realized that Sarah had inherited the best qualities from both her parents, Maria's strength and compassion and his own determination and intelligence. But unlike him, she used her gifts to help others rather than advance herself. 3 weeks after the initial surgery, Maria was finally strong enough to be discharged. Dr. Hayes had arranged for them to stay in a nearby apartment, officially paid for by a hospital charity fund but actually covered by his personal account. Helena would need to remain in the NICU for at least another month, but she was growing stronger every day. The morning of Maria's discharge, Dr. Hayes found himself standing outside her room, trying to gather courage for a conversation he had been avoiding. Finally, he knocked and entered. Maria was dressed in new clothes that one of the nurses had brought from home. She looked tired but much healthier than she had 3 weeks earlier. Sarah was packing the few possessions they had into a plastic bag. "Mrs. Santos," Dr. Hayes said formally, "I wanted to speak with you before you leave the hospital." Sarah looked up hopefully. "Will you still be Elena's doctor? I mean, after we leave here?" "Yes," Dr. Hayes said, then looked at Maria. "I'd like to be involved in both Elena's care and your ongoing treatment. You'll need regular checkups to make sure you're recovering properly." Maria's eyes were wary. "That's very kind, doctor, but we'll understand if you need to transfer our care to someone else. I'm sure you have many important patients who need your attention." "You are important patients," Dr. Hayes said, and meant it. "Both of you." After Sarah left to say goodbye to the NICU staff, Dr. Hayes and Maria faced each other alone for the first time since her recovery. "What do you want from us, Alexander?" Maria asked bluntly. "I want a chance to make up for the past." "You can't make up for 17 years, Maria said. Sarah grew up without a father. She wondered what was wrong with her that made her father leave. No amount of money or medical care can fix that. "I know," Dr. Hayes said, "but I want to try to be the father she deserves from now on." Maria studied his face carefully. "And what happens when being a father becomes inconvenient again? When your wealthy friends find out you have a homeless daughter? When being associated with us hurts your precious reputation?" The questions hit their mark because Dr. Hayes had wondered the same things himself. His life was carefully constructed around success and image. How would his colleagues react when they learned about Sarah and Elena? How would his wealthy patients feel about their surgeon having a family who had lived on the streets? But as he thought about Sarah's courage, her love for her family, her strength in the face of impossible circumstances, Dr. Hayes realized something important. He wasn't ashamed of his daughter. He was ashamed of himself. Sarah was the best thing he had ever been part of creating, even if he had done nothing to deserve credit for who she had become. "Maria," he said quietly, "I can't change the past, but I can promise you that I won't abandon my family again. Whatever it costs me, whatever people think, I want to be Sarah's father and Elena's father too, if you'll let me." Maria stared at Dr. Hayes for a long moment, weighing his words against 17 years of disappointment and struggle. Finally, she sighed deeply. "This isn't just about you and me anymore, Alexander. Sarah is not a little girl who dreams about her father coming home. She's a young woman who has learned to survive without you. You can't just decide to be her father now because it makes you feel better about yourself." "Then what do you suggest?" Dr. Hayes asked. "If you really want to be part of their lives, you have to earn it. And more importantly, you have to tell Sarah the truth. She deserves to know who you are and make her own choice about whether she wants you in her life." The thought of telling Sarah terrified Dr. Hayes more than any surgery he had ever performed. What if she rejected him? What if she was angry at both him and her mother for keeping the secret? What if she decided she was better off without him? But before he could respond, Sarah returned with tears in her eyes from saying goodbye to the NICU staff who had become like family to her. "They're going to miss Elena when she comes home," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. Nurse Patricia said I could call any time if I have questions about taking care of her. Dr. Hayes watched his daughter's emotional maturity and realized Maria was right. Sarah had grown up to be an incredible young woman without him. She didn't need a father, but maybe if he was very lucky, she might want one. Over the next month, Dr. Hayes found reasons to visit Elena frequently. Each visit gave him opportunities to spend time with Sarah, learning about her hopes and dreams. He discovered that she loved to read and had taught herself advanced mathematics by borrowing library books. She wanted to be a teacher someday, to help other children who faced the same challenges she had experienced. Education is the only way to really escape poverty, Sarah told him during one visit. Mama always said that knowledge is the one thing no one can take away from you. Dr. Hayes was amazed by his daughter's wisdom and determination. Despite having missed months of school due to homelessness, Sarah was clearly brilliant. She had the kind of analytical mind that would do. For 3 days, Dr. Hayes heard nothing from Sarah or Maria. He continued his regular hospital duties, but his mind constantly wandered to his family and whether they would give him a chance to prove himself. He had left several messages with the apartment's answering service, but none had been returned. On the 4th day, as he was finishing his morning rounds, he received an unexpected visitor. Sarah appeared in his office doorway, looking nervous but determined. "Can we talk?" she asked simply. Dr. Hayes immediately canceled his next appointment and invited Sarah to sit down. She looked healthier than she had weeks earlier. The regular meals and stable housing had added some much-needed weight to her thin frame, and her eyes were brighter. "I've been thinking about everything you told me," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "I talked to Mama too. She told me things about your relationship that she had never shared before." Dr. Hayes waited, afraid to speak and somehow influence her decision. "She told me that you weren't just some random guy who abandoned us. She said you were young and had big dreams, and that she understood why you chose your career over a family you didn't even know you were going to have." "That doesn't excuse what I did," Dr. Hayes said quietly. "No, it doesn't," Sarah agreed. "But it helps me understand that maybe you weren't evil, just selfish and scared." The assessment stung, but Dr. Hayes knew it was fair. "I also realized something else," Sarah continued. "For 17 years I've been angry at a father who didn't exist. I was angry at this idea of who you were, but I didn't actually know you. Now I have to decide whether to be angry at the real you, or whether to give the real you a chance. And what have you decided?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I want to try, but I have conditions." Dr. Hayes felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. "What kind of conditions?" "First, this isn't just about me. If you want to be part of our family, you have to commit to all of us. Me, Mama, and Elena. Elena especially because she's innocent in all of this and she deserves a father who will never abandon her." "I agree completely," Dr. Hayes said immediately. "Second, I don't want your money just because you feel guilty. If you help us financially, it has to be because you genuinely want to invest in our futures, not because you're trying to buy forgiveness." "I understand." "Third," Sarah continued, her voice becoming stronger, "you have to accept that earning our trust will take time. You can't just show up with expensive gifts and expect us to forget 17 years overnight. You have to prove that you've really changed, not just say it." "That's fair," Dr. Hayes agreed. "What would constitute proof?" Sarah smiled for the first time since entering his office. "Start by being honest with your friends and colleagues. I've heard people talking about the charity case you took on. They don't know we're your family, do they?" Dr. Hayes felt his face flush with shame. Sarah was right. He had been keeping their relationship secret, partly to protect them, but also partly to protect his own reputation. "Today," he said firmly, "I'll make sure everyone knows that you're my daughter and that I'm proud of you." "And finally," Sarah said, "I want to finish high school and go to college, but I want to earn it. I don't want people to think I only got opportunities because my father is rich. If you help me, I want to work for it." Dr. Hayes was amazed by his daughter's integrity and strength. Even now, when she had every right to demand compensation for his years of absence, she insisted on earning her achievements. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the most remarkable person I have ever met. I don't deserve a daughter like you, but I promise I will spend the rest of my life trying to become worthy of being your father." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Does this mean I can call you Dad?" The simple question broke down the last of Dr. Hayes's emotional defenses. He had been called doctor by thousands of people, had been respected and feared, and admired, but no title had ever meant as much as this one simple word from his daughter. "I would be honored," he managed to say. That afternoon, Dr. Hayes called a staff meeting at the hospital. His colleagues filed into the conference room, probably expecting another routine administrative discussion. Instead, Dr. Hayes stood at the front of the room and made an announcement that shocked them all. 3 weeks ago, I took on what many of you considered a charity case, the Santos family. What I didn't tell you at the time, because I had just discovered it myself, is that Maria Santos is the mother of my children. Sarah and Elena Santos are my daughters. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Dr. Sterling, who had criticized the charity case most vocally, looked stunned. "I wanted you all to know," Dr. Hayes continued, "that they are not charity cases to me. They are my family, and I will do whatever it takes to ensure they have the best possible care and opportunities in life." After the meeting, Dr. Hayes felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had spent so many years crafting his image and reputation, but none of that mattered compared to being honest about the people he loved. The next few months brought gradual but meaningful changes to all their lives. Sarah enrolled in an accelerated high school program to make up for the time she had missed, and her natural intelligence shone through immediately. Her teachers were amazed by her motivation and insight, particularly in mathematics and science. Elena came home from the hospital, healthy and strong, and watching Sarah care for her baby sister filled Dr. Hayes with pride and amazement. Sarah was a natural mother figure, patient and loving despite her young age. Maria remained cautious around Dr. Hayes, and he didn't blame her. Their relationship was complicated by years of hurt and the practical challenges of co-parenting adult children. But gradually, they developed a friendship based on mutual respect and their shared love for Sarah and Elena. Dr. Hayes sold his luxury penthouse and bought a large house with enough space for everyone. Sarah initially protested the expense, but he explained that he wanted Elena to grow up in a stable home, where she would never have to worry about having a roof over her head. Sarah excelled in her studies and was accepted to several prestigious universities with substantial scholarships that she had earned through her own merit. Dr. Hayes was bursting with pride at her graduation ceremony, where she was valedictorian despite having missed so much school due to homelessness. In her graduation speech, Sarah spoke about resilience, family, and the power of second chances. She thanked her mother for her strength and sacrifices, and then she looked directly at Dr. Hayes. "And I want to thank my father," she said, "who taught me that it's never too late to choose love over selfishness, and that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we least expect them." After the ceremony, as they celebrated at home with Elena, now a toddler running around the backyard, Dr. Hayes reflected on how much his life had changed. The homeless girl who had begged him for help had given him something far more valuable than he could ever give her. She had given him a chance to become the man he should have been all along. "Dad," Sarah said, interrupting his thoughts. Elena's first word was "Dada." "I think she's trying to get your attention." Dr. Hayes looked down at his youngest daughter, who was indeed reaching up toward him with her little arms, babbling happily. As he picked her up, he realized that this was what success really looked like. Not the expensive suits or the prestigious hospital position, but the trust of a child who had never known a world where her father wasn't there to catch her when she fell. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah, "for giving me a second chance." Sarah smiled and hugged both her father and baby sister. "Thank you for taking it." Years later, Dr. Hayes would look back on the rainy day when a desperate teenage girl begged him for help outside the hospital as the most important day of his life, not because it led to a heartwarming reunion, but because it taught him that the most profound discoveries often come from the people we might otherwise overlook, and that sometimes saving someone else's life is really about saving your own soul. Sarah eventually became a doctor herself, specializing in pediatric medicine with a focus on treating children from low-income families. Elena grew up surrounded by love and opportunity, never knowing what it felt like to be abandoned or unwanted. And Maria, watching her daughters thrive, finally allowed herself to believe that happy endings were possible, even after years of struggle. The family that began with a desperate plea on a rainy sidewalk had become something beautiful, proof that love, when given a second chance, can heal even the deepest wounds and create the most unexpected miracles.